Helena Moretti was no stranger to the eerie allure of the past. As a seasoned art restorer, she had spent countless hours breathing life into forgotten relics. But nothing could have prepared her for the dark enigma awaiting in the shadowed corners of antique echoes, a decrepit shop hidden in the fog-drenched backstreets of the city. Its weathered sign swung with a creak, barely clinging to rusted chains. The storefront seemed to exude an air of foreboding, its glass display cases cloaked with dust as though shielding their secrets from prying eyes. Inside, time itself felt warped. The faint chime of the doorbell gave way to a heavy silence, broken only by the faint tick of an ancient grandfather clock. Shelves sagged under the weight of artifacts too old to remember their purpose, each one emanating an uncanny energy. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like blood long dried. As Helena's heels clicked against the uneven wooden floor, her pulse quickened. She could swear the shadows shifted as she moved, as though unseen eyes were tracking her every step. Her attention was drawn to a small, locked glass case in the far corner of the room. Beneath a dim bulb that flickered sporadically, a golden ring rested on a bed of faded velvet. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The band was impossibly intricate, etched with strange, swirling patterns that seemed to shimmer and shift when she stared too long. At its center sat a deep crimson gem, glowing faintly as if alive, pulsating with a heartbeat that mirrored her own. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Something about it felt wrong. The shopkeeper appeared from the shadows as if summoned by her curiosity. A hunched old man with skin like parchment, his watery eyes sparkled with an unsettling eagerness. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he rasped, his voice dry as autumn leaves. "It's said to be one of a kind, forged centuries ago by a craftsman whose name has been lost to time. But beware," he added with a crooked grin, "every treasure comes with a cost." His words hung in the air, sending a chill down Helena's back, but her fascination overpowered her caution. Helena asked to examine the ring, her voice trembling slightly. The moment the shopkeeper unlocked the case, the room seemed to grow colder. She hesitated before picking it up, her fingers brushing the icy metal. The gem flared briefly, casting her reflection in its blood-red surface. For a moment, she swore the reflection blinked, even though she hadn't. Her stomach churned, but she convinced herself it was just her imagination. Without another thought, she slipped the ring onto her finger. The instant the band encircled her finger, a sharp pain shot through her hand, like a needle piercing her skin. She gasped but quickly dismissed it as a minor pinch from the ring's intricate design. The shopkeeper simply chuckled under his breath, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. "A perfect fit," he murmured. His cryptic tone was both a statement and a warning. As Helena left the shop, the fog outside seemed denser, almost suffocating. Every step felt heavier, as if the ring were somehow tethering her to the shadows of the street. The faint hum of traffic in the distance seemed oddly distorted, like whispers carried on the wind. And then she heard it, a soft, melodic voice calling her name from nowhere. Startled, she spun around, but the street was empty. The voice was gone, leaving behind only an echo that chilled her to the core. Helena shook her head, trying to shake off the unease creeping into her thoughts. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something ancient and malevolent had just taken root in her life, hidden in the deceptively beautiful gleam of that cursed ring. That night, as Helena drifted into sleep, the world of her dreams was anything but serene. She found herself standing in a desolate landscape, shrouded in a dense fog that seemed to cling to her skin like icy tendrils. The ground beneath her feet was soft, almost spongy, as if she were walking on layers of decaying leaves or something far more sinister. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faintest whispers, low, guttural murmurs that seemed to slither through the fog, just out of reach. Each word was indecipherable, spoken in a language that felt ancient, primal, and dangerous. Ahead of her, a faint glow pierced the mist, drawing her forward like a moth to a flame. As she approached, the whispers grew louder, rising into an eerie symphony of voices that seemed to chant her name. Her heartbeat quickened, each step echoing unnaturally in the oppressive void around her. The glow resolved into a small stone pedestal, upon which rested the same ring she had placed on her finger earlier that day. But now the gem pulsed with a vivid crimson light, like a heartbeat disconnected from any living thing. Helena reached out, compelled by a force she couldn't explain, her fingers trembling as they brushed the ring. The moment her skin made contact, a sharp, electric pain surged through her arm, paralyzing her. The fog parted violently, revealing shadowy figures surrounding her. They stood motionless, their forms barely human, twisted and elongated, their faces obscured by darkness. But their eyes burned with the same red light as the ring, piercing through her soul with an intensity that made her feel exposed and powerless. A sudden gust of wind howled through the air, carrying a bone-chilling sound that resembled a mournful wail. Helena turned to run, but her feet were rooted in place, as if the ground had come alive, holding her captive. The figures began to move closer, their distorted limbs reaching toward her. Their whispers morphed into anguished cries, each voice layered with pain and fury, yet all eerily synchronized. "You've chosen," they hissed in unison, the words reverberating in her mind like an unbearable cacophony. Desperately, Helena looked down at her hand, only to find the ring glowing brighter, its light searing into her skin. Black veins spread from the band, crawling up her arm like tendrils of ink, as if the ring were sinking its roots deep into her being. The pain was excruciating, yet she couldn't scream, her voice stolen by the suffocating terror. The figures loomed closer, their presence overwhelming, and just as one reached out to touch her, she woke up. Helena bolted upright in her bed, drenched in sweat, her breathing ragged. The room was dark, yet the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. She clutched her hand instinctively and froze. The ring was still there, and the faint glow of the gem pulsed like a heartbeat in the darkness. Her skin bore faint black lines, as if the veins from her dream had begun to etch themselves into her reality. The whispers from her dream had not disappeared entirely. As she strained to listen, they seemed to emanate faintly from the walls of her bedroom, a soft yet malevolent hum that made her stomach churn. She tried to remove the ring, yanking at it with trembling hands, but it wouldn't budge. Instead, a sharp sting shot through her finger, making her cry out. Then something caught her eye. The reflection in her bedside mirror was wrong. She could see herself sitting on the bed, but her reflection wasn't mirroring her movements. Instead, it stared directly at her, its head tilted unnaturally to the side, a wicked grin spreading across its face. The whispers grew louder, now coming from the mirror itself, as if her reflection had found its voice. "You can't run," it said, its tone dripping with malice. "You belong to us now." Helena screamed and hurled a pillow at the mirror, shattering it into countless shards. The room fell silent, but the sense of dread lingered, suffocating her. As the faint glow of the ring illuminated her trembling hand, she realized the nightmare had only just begun. The days following the dream were anything but ordinary for Helena. Her once cozy apartment began to take on an oppressive atmosphere, as though the walls were closing in. It wasn't just her imagination. Shadows stretched unnaturally long in the corners of her rooms, defying the light sources. The air carried an unfamiliar chill, and objects seemed to shift positions when she wasn't looking. At first, she dismissed it as fatigue, but the unease grew stronger with every passing hour. The whispers had followed her from her dreams. They were faint at first, barely audible, like the rustle of leaves. But now, they were becoming more distinct, breaking through the silence of her home with haunting clarity. She could hear them calling her name, urging her to listen, their tones oscillating between pleading and commanding. They seemed to emanate from the ring itself, which now felt heavier on her finger, as though it were anchoring her to an invisible force. One evening, as Helena attempted to distract herself with her work, she noticed the flickering of the overhead light. The bulb dimmed and brightened erratically, casting unsettling patterns across the room. Frustrated, she rose to adjust it, but the moment she touched the switch, every light in the apartment went out. Darkness enveloped her, thick and suffocating. Her heart pounded as she fumbled for her phone, the cold metal of the ring pressing into her skin like a cruel reminder of its presence. A faint glow caught her eye. She turned slowly to see the ring shining with an otherworldly crimson hue, casting a dim red light across the room. Her breath hitched as she realized the glow wasn't alone. In the darkened reflection of her living room window, she saw movement, a figure standing just behind her, its form shrouded in shadow. Helena froze, her eyes wide with terror, unable to turn around. The figure didn't move, but she could feel its presence, a cold and malevolent energy radiating toward her. Finally, mustering the courage to face whatever was behind her, she spun around. The room was empty. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she scanned every corner, but nothing was out of place. Nothing, except the faint impression of a handprint on the glass, its shape too large to be human. She backed away slowly, the whispers now louder, swirling around her in a chaotic chorus. Determined to escape the growing madness, Helena decided to leave her apartment and find answers. She grabbed her coat and keys, but as she reached for the doorknob, a sharp pain lanced through her hand. The ring's glow intensified, and her vision blurred. For a brief moment, the world around her shifted, the walls of her apartment melting away into a twisted landscape of crimson skies and blackened earth. Figures emerged from the shadows, their bodies grotesque and contorted, crawling toward her with unnatural speed. She stumbled backward, gasping for air, and the vision dissipated as quickly as it had appeared. Helena collapsed against the wall, tears streaming down her face as the realization set in. The ring wasn't just an object. It was a gateway to something far darker, far more dangerous than she could comprehend. The following night, the tension reached a breaking point. As Helena sat on her bed, staring at the cursed ring, she heard a noise, a soft tapping sound coming from the window. The rhythm was deliberate, unnatural, like fingers drumming against the glass. Gathering her courage, she approached the window, her breath fogging the cold pain. There was nothing outside but darkness and the faint reflection of her own terrified face. But then the reflection shifted. A pair of glowing red eyes appeared behind her, staring back with a predatory intensity. The tapping turned into pounding, and Helena stumbled away, screaming. The window shattered outward with an ear-splitting crash, shards of glass raining into the void beyond. She fell to the floor, clutching her head as the whispers transformed into deafening roars. The room fell silent once again, save for the faint hum of the ring. As she sat trembling, she noticed something new. Faint words etched into the surface of the ring's gem, words that seemed to rearrange themselves into a sinister warning. You cannot escape. The ring wasn't just a curse, it was a trap. And now Helena realized she wasn't the first victim, nor would she be the last. The night Helena's grip on reality began to crumble was unlike any other. Exhausted but unable to sleep, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her heart raced, and every creak of the old wooden floors made her flinch. The air was thick and heavy, as if the room itself was alive and watching her. The whispers, once faint and distant, had become a constant drone in her ears. Their voices overlapped, forming a sinister chorus that gnawed at her sanity. As the clock struck 3 a.m., Helena felt a sudden chill sweep over her room. Her breath turned to mist in the freezing air. The dim glow of the streetlights outside flickered erratically, casting strange, dancing shadows on her walls. And then the ring began to burn. The gem pulsed violently, its crimson light spilling into the room, casting long, claw-like shadows that seemed to stretch toward her. She clutched her hand, gasping in pain as the burning sensation spread from her finger through her entire arm. In an instant, the world around her shifted. She was no longer in her room, but standing in the middle of a vast, desolate field under a blood-red sky. The air reeked of sulfur, and the ground beneath her feet was damp and sticky, like coagulated blood. In the distance, she saw a towering black tree, its twisted branches reaching toward the heavens like skeletal hands. Beneath the tree, figures cloaked in shadow writhed and moved, their distorted shapes defying logic. The whispers grew louder, their voices no longer confined to her mind but echoing around her, rising into anguished screams. Helena tried to run, but the ground held her feet fast, as though it had come alive to trap her. She struggled against the invisible force, tears streaming down her face as the figures beneath the tree turned their hollow, glowing eyes toward her. One by one, they began to approach, their movements slow but deliberate, as if savoring her fear. Helena's panic reached a fever pitch as she realized she was holding something in her free hand, a dagger, ancient and ornate, with the same swirling patterns etched into its blade as the ones on the ring. The whispers shifted, their tone changing to one of urgency. "Use it," they commanded, the words vibrating in her skull. "You must." Her eyes darted toward the figures now circling her, their grotesque forms looming closer. She raised the dagger, trembling, unsure if it was meant for them, or for herself. But before she could decide, the largest of the figures lunged forward, its elongated arm reaching for her. The world seemed to implode in that moment. She screamed as she was hurled back into her bedroom, the crimson light of the ring exploding outward like a supernova. The force knocked her to the floor, and the whispers ceased abruptly, leaving only an eerie silence. Helena's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of what had happened. Her hand still clutched the dagger, now dripping with a dark, viscous substance that evaporated into the air like smoke. Her relief was short-lived. As she sat on the floor, gasping for air, she noticed something horrifying. Her reflection in the shattered fragments of her mirror wasn't mimicking her movements. Instead, it stared back at her with an unnatural stillness, its expression twisted into a grotesque smile. Slowly, It raised its hand to show the ring glowing brighter than ever. Helena's stomach churned as her reflection leaned closer, its lips moving silently. She didn't need to hear the words to understand. They were burned into her mind. "You cannot escape," it mouthed, its voice resonating in her thoughts. "The ring is bound to you now. And so are we." The room began to warp again, the walls stretching and contorting as if being pulled into the same crimson void she had seen moments before. Desperate, she tried to rip the ring from her finger, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever, their voices chanting in unison. Her vision blurred, her strength waned, and just as she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness, she saw the reflection's eyes burn brighter, consuming her completely in their fiery glow. When Helena woke, the room was silent and still, the only evidence of the night's horrors being the dagger lying beside her bed and the persistent glow of the ring on her finger. But now the glow wasn't faint. It was vibrant, pulsating with a terrifying energy, as though the ring had taken something from her. She touched her face and froze. Her reflection in the nearby shard of mirror didn't match her movements. It never would again. Something else now lived within her, something tied to the ring, something watching, waiting. The morning after the nightmarish events, Helena awoke to a suffocating silence. The once familiar sounds of the city, cars honking, distant chatter, the hum of life, were gone. Her apartment felt unnaturally still, as though it existed in a void cut off from the world. Every object seemed out of place, as if something had moved them just enough to unsettle her, but not enough to be immediately obvious. The ring, now glowing faintly even in daylight, pulsed against her finger like a parasite feeding on her fear. Desperate for answers, Helena turned to her laptop, searching for any clues about the origins of the cursed artifact. Her fingers trembled as she typed keywords into the search engine: ancient ring, curse, whispers and dreams. The results were frustratingly vague, filled with myths and folklore. But one thread caught her eye, a discussion forum filled with stories eerily similar to hers. Other users described finding inexplicable rings, whispers in the dark, and visions that blurred the lines between dream and reality. The most chilling detail was a recurring warning: once worn, the ring cannot be removed. It becomes a part of you. One post stood out among the others, written by someone who claimed to have survived the curse, if only barely. The user detailed a strange connection between the ring and its owner, stating that the artifact drew power from the wearer's fears, feeding on their soul. As Helena scrolled, her heart sank. The post ended abruptly with a single haunting sentence: "If you're reading this, it's already too late." Her unease deepened when she noticed something unusual about her search history. The timestamps indicated searches she didn't remember making, searches for burial sites, rituals, and sacrificial offerings. Her laptop's camera light blinked momentarily, and she slammed it shut, her paranoia now a full-blown panic. Helena decided to return to the antique shop, hoping to confront the owner and demand answers. But when she arrived, the shop was gone. In its place was an empty lot overgrown with weeds, as if the building had never existed. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossibility. The whispers grew louder, mocking her attempts at understanding. On her way home, she felt the weight of the ring pulling at her hand. Every step felt heavier, as though an unseen force was dragging her back toward the void she had glimpsed in her nightmares. The shadows around her lengthened unnaturally, and the air seemed to hum with an ominous energy. Passing by a reflective window, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, or rather, something that looked like her but wasn't. The figure smiled wickedly and mouthed a single word: soon. Determined to break the curse, Helena rifled through her belongings, searching for anything that could provide a clue. That's when she noticed a small leather-bound notebook on her bookshelf, one she didn't recognize. The cover was worn, and its pages smelled of mildew and age. Inside were handwritten notes in a language she couldn't understand, accompanied by crude sketches of the ring and its unsettling patterns. One sketch depicted a ritual involving the ring, a dagger, and a pool of blood encircled by symbols. In the margins, a translation was scrawled in trembling handwriting: "The ring demands a price. Life for freedom. Blood for release." Her stomach turned as she realized the symbols mirrored those she had seen on her arm during her visions. As the sun began to set, Helena noticed something terrifying. The crimson glow of the ring intensified with the darkness, as though drawing strength from the absence of light. The whispers became deafening, overlapping voices screaming for her attention. She clutched her head, trying to block out the noise, but it was futile. A sudden, sharp pain shot through her hand, and she looked down to see the black veins from her dreams crawling up her arm, spreading faster than before. Driven by desperation, she called the one person she trusted, her friend Anna. When Anna arrived, her concern was immediate. "Helena, you look different," she said hesitantly, her eyes lingering on the dark lines creeping up Helena's neck. But when Anna tried to remove the ring, her hand recoiled as if burned. A faint scream echoed through the room, followed by a gust of wind that extinguished every light. In the suffocating darkness, Anna's voice trembled. "Helena, what's happening?" Before she could respond, a chilling presence filled the room. The air grew colder, and the faint glow of the ring illuminated a figure standing in the corner. It was the same shadowy entity from Helena's dream, its crimson eyes fixed on her. As the figure stepped closer, Anna screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening whispers that filled the apartment. The shadow extended a hand toward Helena, its long, bony fingers beckoning. For the first time, the whispers formed coherent words. The price must be paid. Helena's mind raced, torn between sacrificing herself or letting the curse claim her friend. The ring tightened painfully on her finger, its light flaring brighter as if anticipating her choice. The room began to warp, the walls melting into a crimson void. Helena realized with horrifying clarity that the nightmare wasn't confined to her dreams. It was her reality now, and the line between the two had been irrevocably erased. Helena's descent into madness had begun. Each passing day blurred the line between what was real and what was not. The ring's glow never dimmed, even in the brightest daylight, and the black veins creeping up her arm now seemed permanent, etched into her skin like a brand. She could no longer ignore the whispers. They spoke to her constantly, sometimes in languages she couldn't understand, other times in her own voice, mocking her thoughts and fears. Determined to find answers, Helena began piecing together the fragments of her ordeal. She returned to the leather-bound notebook she had found and studied the cryptic symbols obsessively. Pages were filled with accounts of others who had encountered the ring, each story more horrifying than the last. One passage caught her attention. The bearer will be shown what they fear the most. The ring is not a curse, it is a judgment. The whispers took on a new tone after she read that line, mocking and accusatory. They seemed to echo her own guilt and regrets, dragging her deeper into despair. Helena realized the ring wasn't just an object of torment. It was pulling her into a confrontation with something far darker, something within herself. Desperate for clarity, she reached out to an old acquaintance, Father Gabriel, a reclusive priest known for his expertise in the occult. His small church, hidden in the outskirts of the city, was a sanctuary of flickering candles and faint incense, but even its sacred walls could not offer her relief. As she recounted her experiences, Father Gabriel's face grew pale. "You must understand," he said gravely, "this is not just an artifact. It is a tether to another realm, one that thrives on human weakness and fear." Father Gabriel revealed a chilling detail. The ring was said to be forged by a cult centuries ago, a vessel for summoning entities that preyed on the souls of the living. "It doesn't just torment you," he explained. "It feeds on you, binding you to its will until there's nothing left." When Helena asked how to break the curse, his expression darkened. "There is no breaking it," he said, barely above a whisper. "The only way to sever the bond is through an act of sacrifice. And even then, the cost is unimaginable." Despite his warning, Helena begged for help. Reluctantly, Father Gabriel handed her a weathered scroll containing a ritual of banishment. The instructions were clear but brutal. She would need to confront the entity bound to the ring and offer it something of equal value. Her very essence, her soul. The night of the ritual was suffused with a suffocating dread. Father Gabriel set up a sacred circle in the church's crypt, using salt, candles, and symbols Helena couldn't begin to comprehend. The whispers grew louder as the ring resisted her efforts, the gem now pulsating with a furious, blood-red glow. Helena stood in the center of the circle, clutching the dagger from her visions, her hands trembling with both fear and resolve. As the ritual began, the candles flickered violently, their flames stretching unnaturally high before extinguishing all at once. Darkness enveloped the crypt, and the air grew icy. Then, a guttural growl echoed through the chamber, followed by the faint sound of footsteps. Helena's breath caught in her throat as the shadowy figure from her nightmares materialized before her, its form towering and grotesque. Its eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce her very soul. The whispers merged into a single voice, deep and resonant, shaking the walls of the crypt. "You cannot defy me," it snarled. "You brought me into your world, and now I am part of you. The figure lunged toward her, but the sacred circle held it back. Helena gripped the dagger tightly, its weight feeling both comforting and terrifying. "What do you want?" she screamed, her voice cracking under the pressure. The entity's lips curled into a malevolent grin. "You already know," it replied, gesturing to the veins on her arm. "Your fear. Your guilt. Your soul." Helena's mind raced. Memories she had buried long ago surfaced vividly, moments of pain, regret, and betrayal. The entity was feeding on them, growing stronger with each passing second. Tears streamed down her face as she realized what the whispers had been trying to tell her all along. The ring wasn't forcing these fears upon her. It was revealing what had always been there. Summoning every ounce of courage, Helena raised the dagger and pressed its blade to the glowing gem of the ring. The entity screamed, its voice shaking the foundations of the crypt as the blade cracked the gem. A blinding light filled the room, and Helena was hurled backward. When she opened her eyes, the crypt was silent. The entity was gone, but the ring remained on her finger, its glow now faint but insistent. Father Gabriel knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. "It isn't over," he said quietly. "You've weakened it, but the bond remains. The question is, how far are you willing to go to be free?" Helena stared at the ring, her heart heavy with the weight of her choice. For the first time, she realized the true horror of her situation. Even if she survived, she would never escape the darkness the ring had brought into her life. It was no longer just a curse. It was a part of her. Helena's resolve hardened as the days dragged on. The whispers had grown relentless, no longer content with haunting her thoughts. Now they spoke of her impending doom. Her body weakened with each passing moment, the black veins spreading across her skin like a web of corruption. Sleep was no longer an escape. Each time she closed her eyes, she was dragged back to the crimson void, where the shadowy figure waited, taunting her with promises of eternal torment. She knew there was only one way forward. She had to face the entity, to confront whatever nightmare lurked behind the ring's power. The night of the confrontation arrived under a moonless sky, the darkness outside her apartment oppressive and unnatural. Helena gathered what little she had left, Father Gabriel's scroll, the ancient dagger, and her own dwindling courage. She had chosen the old church's crypt as the battleground, knowing its consecrated ground might give her an advantage. Yet as she descended the narrow staircase into the cold, stone chamber, a suffocating sense of dread clawed at her chest. The crypt was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against her ears and made her feel as though she were submerged in deep water. The air was colder than it should have been, and her breath misted in the faint glow of the ring. She stood in the center of the circle Father Gabriel had prepared earlier, its lines drawn with a mixture of salt and blood. The symbols etched into the ground pulsed faintly, mirroring the heartbeat-like rhythm of the cursed ring. In her other hand, she clutched the dagger tightly, its blade heavy with the weight of destiny. Helena began reciting the incantation from the scroll, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier with each word. The candles around the circle flickered violently, their flames elongating into unnatural shapes before snuffing out completely. Darkness enveloped the crypt, but the ring's glow intensified, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. And then the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. It was as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath. Then, from the far corner of the crypt, came a sound, a deep, guttural growl that reverberated through the stone walls. Helena turned, her heart pounding, as the shadowy figure materialized before her, its form more defined than ever. It was massive, its elongated limbs stretching unnaturally, its body cloaked in an aura of pure malevolence. Its eyes burned with a crimson light that seemed to pierce her very soul. "You dare summon me?" the entity snarled, its voice a symphony of countless tormented souls. The sound was almost too much to bear, sending a jolt of pain through her skull. Helena stood her ground, though her legs trembled beneath her. "I want this to end," she said, her voice cracking but determined. "You've taken enough from me." The entity let out a low, mocking laugh that shook the ground beneath her feet. "End? There is no end. You bound yourself to me the moment you wore the ring. I am part of you now, as you are part of me." With a burst of courage, Helena raised the dagger, its blade glinting in the dim light. "Then I'll sever that bond," she hissed, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her. The entity's expression shifted, its grin widening impossibly. "Sever the bond," it echoed, stepping closer until it stood just at the edge of the circle. "You cannot sever what is already fused. The bond is stronger than blood, deeper than your soul. The creature extended one of its grotesque limbs, its long, clawed fingers hovering just above the circle's boundary. The salt and blood hissed and burned where its presence neared, but it did not cross. "I will make you an offer," it said, its tone dripping with malevolence. "Relinquish your soul to me willingly, and I will grant you peace. Refuse, and you will rot in eternal torment, forever trapped in the shadows of your own fear." Helena's mind raced. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to flee, but she knew there was no escape. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever, their voices pleading and commanding all at once. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, and screamed over the cacophony, "I choose freedom." With that, she drove the dagger into the center of the ring, its blade piercing the crimson gem. The crypt erupted in a blinding explosion of light and sound. The entity let out an ear-splitting roar, its form dissolving into tendrils of shadow that lashed against the walls, trying to escape. The glow of the ring intensified, its light consuming everything in its path, until there was nothing but silence. When Helena opened her eyes, she was alone in the crypt. The ring lay shattered at her feet, its once vivid gem now a dull, lifeless stone. The black veins on her arm had faded, leaving faint scars as the only evidence of her ordeal. But as she staggered out of the crypt, a chilling thought gripped her. The whispers were gone, but the shadows in her mind lingered. The entity may have been banished, but she would never forget the terror it had etched into her very being. And somewhere, far beyond the veil of the mortal world, a faint, mocking laugh echoed, promising that the battle was over, but the war was far from won. The crypt was behind her, but Helena's victory felt hollow. The shattered pieces of the ring still haunted her thoughts, their dull fragments etched into her memory like scars. The whispers had ceased, the shadows no longer stretched unnaturally, but an unsettling quiet now filled the void. It wasn't peace, it was the calm before a storm she could feel but couldn't see. As she emerged into the cold night, the air felt heavier, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. Helena's body bore the physical toll of her ordeal. The black veins that had once marked her arm were gone, but faint scars remained, resembling the twisted, arcane symbols etched into the ring. Her reflection in the shattered glass of a nearby window caught her eye. For a moment, it looked back at her normally, her face pale and exhausted. But as she moved away, it lingered, just a second too long, its lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. The streets were eerily deserted as Helena made her way home, the shadows of the city deeper and more impenetrable than she remembered. The faint hum of streetlights seemed distorted, the flickering bulbs casting her shadow at unnatural angles. A sensation of being watched crept over her, but every time she turned, there was nothing, only the oppressive emptiness of the night. Back in her apartment, the air felt stifling, suffused with an invisible weight. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, trying to steady her breath. The apartment was silent, but the kind of silence that wasn't truly empty. The kind of silence that felt alive. Helena's eyes darted to the corner of the room, where a faint shimmer caught her attention. Her heart sank. There, among the mundane clutter of her home, lay one of the ring's fragments. She hadn't brought it with her, yet it was there, glowing faintly as if mocking her. Terrified, she swept the shard into a small tin box and shoved it into the darkest corner of her closet. But the act brought little comfort. That night, Helena tried to sleep, though her dreams had long since become battlegrounds for her subconscious fears. As she drifted off, the whispers returned, not in words this time, but in sensations. The weight of unseen hands pressing on her chest, the faint brush of cold fingers against her skin. She woke with a start, drenched in sweat, only to find her bedroom bathed in faint, flickering red light. Her eyes darted to her nightstand, and her blood turned cold. The fragment of the ring she had locked away was there, its glow weak but pulsing, as though it had never left. Beside it lay a single word scratched into the wood. Soon. In the days that followed, Helena became consumed by paranoia. She began noticing small changes in her surroundings. Books moved from their shelves, the sound of faint footsteps echoed in the hall when she was alone, and mirrors reflected things they shouldn't. Shapes moving in the background, or her own face twisted into expressions she wasn't making. The scars on her arm began to itch, a dull burning sensation radiating from beneath her skin. One evening, as she sat in her living room attempting to distract herself, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number, containing only a photo. Her breath hitched as she opened it. The image was of her apartment, taken from outside her window. The timestamp was from just moments ago. Trembling, she turned toward the window, but there was no one there, only her own pale reflection staring back, lips trembling with fear. The final straw came when Helena ventured into her building's basement to check on the storage locker, where she had placed the other fragments of the ring. The padlock hung open, the door ajar. Inside, the box was empty, the fragments gone. In their place was a single message scrawled in ash on the wall. You called us. We never leave. Her knees buckled as the realization sank in. The ring had never been destroyed. The entity had never truly been banished. It was with her still, tethered to her in ways she couldn't understand. The glow of the fragments wasn't just a reminder of its presence. It was a promise of its return. Helena now lives in a perpetual state of unease, every moment overshadowed by the lingering threat of the ring's power. She avoids mirrors, knowing they show truths she doesn't want to face. She leaves her lights on at all times, though the shadows still creep into the edges of her vision. She has become a prisoner in her own mind, haunted by the knowledge that the battle isn't over. The whispers may be silent for now, but they are merely waiting. And somewhere, far beyond the veil of human perception, the entity watches, patient and unrelenting. It knows Helena will slip, will falter, and when she does, it will return to claim what it is owed. After all, the ring was never just an object. It was a gateway. And once opened, gateways can never truly be closed. For those who stumble upon the remnants of this story, take this warning. If you ever find an artifact that whispers, run. Do not listen, do not touch. For Helena's fate was sealed the moment she gave in to its call. The question now isn't if the entity will return, but when.